Hello there, my name is Sixo, but more on that later, as today we're checking out not just a robot in disguise, but an actual robot no less. Yes, the fine folks at Robosen have provided a copy of their much-hyped self-transforming Optimus Prime for me to take a pass at. You know, the one that responds to your every command and even includes a huge amount of dialogue recorded by the legendary voice of Optimus himself, Peter Cullen. I've seen so much chatter about this thing online already, with strong opinions ranging from giddy excitement at the prospect of a transformer that can change between modes on command, all the way to confusion about just who is attracted to such a thing to begin with. Ultimately, I was intrigued to make up my own mind, meaning that I just couldn't pass up the opportunity, especially given the hefty entry price this thing usually commands. To their credit, Robosen have demanded nothing from me in terms of the content of the review, and quite the opposite have encouraged me to be upfront about my feedback on what is surely one of the most talked about bits of robot-related paraphernalia from the last year or so. Is it the must-have item that all Transformers fans should be clamouring to add to their collection, or is it an overly expensive novelty that's landed rather awkwardly in the middle of a cost of living crisis? Let's find out. First thing to note is the box is perhaps surprisingly subdued, but does still manage to ooze style with this rather stunningly shiny outline depiction of Optimus Prime in his robot mode, even if the design doesn't actually match the product in question in this case. In fact, with just an Autobot logo on the rear, there's really not much here to give the game away about what to expect once you actually open the package, save for some brief blurb on the side which talks about voice-controlled interactive play and the like. I guess if you're in the market to drop $1,000 or so on something like this, you're probably going to have done your homework first, eh? Anyway, once you get the tape cut and the top flaps open, inside you'll find a sort of hard shell reinforced suitcase type thing, which puts your typical clamshells to shame. Unlocking it and opening the top, I half expected to find some precious antique inside, given that the presentation and preservation of it is so top tier. As well as both the charging plug and cable and the surprisingly succinct instructions, all of the various accessories and other accoutrements are packed inside smaller cardboard boxes, whilst there's a larger hard case which contains the figure's weapons, including both his signature blaster and an axe, which of course we'll check out in just a moment. Then you have Optimus himself, which takes a bit of lifting but is looking mighty fine straight out the box. Of course, you have the initial pleasure of removing all those little bits of protective film they put on everything nowadays. Then all that's left to do is install the pair of chrome smokestack accessories on the back of the truck mode and he's ready to roll. One thing about this release that's perhaps easy to overlook given everything else it does is just how attractive it is, with the alternate form being a great example of the classic 1980s Optimus Prime truck mode overall. True, there's a slight visual compromise with the fairly obvious robot mode feet stacked atop the rear truck bed, but honestly I've seen way worse on actual Transformers toys, so given this thing's nature, I'm inclined to be a little forgiving, especially as every other inch of it looks nothing shy of outright stylish. There's more than enough to draw your visual interest here, including a very premium finish, decent moulded detail, some nice paint applications all over, and even the presence of rubber tyres and the like. It's fair to say he's pretty huge too, with a sizable footprint well beyond any other Optimus Prime figure you're likely to have in your collection already, whether that's mainline, masterpiece, or otherwise. This thing certainly makes its presence known. Before you actually turn him on, Optimus doesn't really hold in place, with all of the various gears giving way and meaning the truck mode will quickly come undone when you try and move it. It's a bit like trying to pick up a sleeping cat, if anything. However, a quick flick of the power switch and he'll soon make his presence known.
Greetings, friend. I am Optimus Prime.
At which point the gears click into place and everything feels as solid as you would expect. Seeing the lights on is a real thrill in and of itself, as it lets you know that the Autobot leader is primed and ready for action. But it's once you start experimenting with this figure's features that things really get fun. There are essentially two ways to control Optimus, either by the toy's primary voice command gimmick, or by downloading the accompanying Robosen app and pairing it with the figure via Bluetooth, which opens up an incredible range of play value and interactive options far beyond what you get by just shouting at it. For starters though, you can simply kick off each voice command in the same way with a simple greeting. Hey Optimus Prime.
Greetings.
And then follow it up with the specific action you want Optimus to complete. Roll out.
Let's roll.
Turn left.
Let's roll.
Turn right.
Let's roll.
It's at this point that it's worth being aware of how much room you will need for this thing to operate, lest it suddenly up and roll off the table or something. Anyway, fun as this is, it's even better with the app, which allows you to drive the toy around much like a remote-controlled car.
Let's roll. Let's roll. Optimus Prime, reporting for
You can even honk the horn. or activate a range of key phrases stored inside this thing's memory that you might not otherwise hear.
Join me and the Autobots. I welcome the challenge. Happy birthday from Optimus Prime. Beast mode activated. The battle is won, but the war is far from over. We must stop the monsters. It's now or never. I can really sink my teeth into this mission. Our legacy spans many generations.
Overall, there's a ton of fun to be had in this truck mode as it is, although really it barely scratches the surface of everything the figure is capable of, as demonstrated once you utter those immortal words.
Hey Optimus Prime,
Greetings.
convert.
Yes, you might have seen it in videos or whatever, but believe me when I say, nothing quite prepares you for how awesome this sight is up close and personal. No matter whatever other features might be stuffed into this thing, the transformation sequence will always be the major highlight, I think. It's also worth mentioning that if you're even slightly disgruntled by the use of the word convert, something which has been a staple of all official Transformers toys for decades now as a mean of protecting the brand's IP, then have no fear. It's not mentioned in the instructions, but the more traditional turn of phrase will do just fine.
Hey Optimus Prime,
Greetings.
transform.
One thing that does take a moment to get used to is that Optimus ends up with his back to you as a result of the transformation, meaning that he'll need to be turned around in order to get the action going. It's arguably a slight annoyance at times, but it's far from a major barrier to enjoyment at all. Equally, you can just tick an option in the app that instructs Optimus to automatically turn around in robot mode, either before or after transforming. So that's a potential solution should you really need it. In any case, it won't be long before you're drinking in the delights of that handsome robot form, which looks every bit as heroic as you might hope for from the famed Autobot leader, to the point where even if this thing couldn't perform a multitude of interactive tasks, you'd still find a use for it looking pretty on a shelf somewhere. Of particular note is the head sculpt, which sings heavily from the Masterpiece MP10 hymn book, and gives this Optimus a heavy cartoon vibe whilst also still being respectful towards the vintage toy design in its way. You can even remove the little flap behind the head to give a somewhat cleaner look should you prefer, which yes, it's parts forming, but still, it's an option. I also really appreciate the proportions of this design, which I think managed to look suitably heroic and sidestep any awkward compromises, in spite of the toy having to contort in all kinds of unusual ways once you get the voice commands rolling. The robot mode also boasts a notable presence on account of its incredible size. At 19 inches tall, he'll certainly take up some notable real estate in your house, and looms well above most other interpretations of the Autobot leader you could care to imagine, including the recent LEGO release. Before you even give him anything to do, Prime is not one to stand still, swaying back and forth with a gentle rhythm almost akin to breathing, as the mechanisms employed give the slightest sound of whirring, just to remind you he's ready and waiting to take your commands. I was initially a bit bemused by this until my wife rather cleverly and accurately guessed that it's because the gears aren't designed to stand statically, and the movement is essentially required to keep Optimus in a resting position. As if to further demonstrate that, leaving him for long enough without giving him anything to do means Optimus will occasionally opt to assume a battle stance of sorts, all of his own volition. Well, either that or he just fancied trying his hand at dabbing.
Damn!
And sure enough, after too long a period of inaction, the toy will simply shut down altogether, at which point it resorts to a sort of kneeling down, squatting behind a bush type pose. It's an odd look, especially from a toy collector perspective, when you consider that many of us would probably opt to have such an item on display in robot mode if we could. Although having talked to a few people more in the know on robotics than me, it seems this is a perfectly understandable solution given the various gears and mechanisms included here would need to rest when not actually in active use. I've seen one or two ideas about custom making a display stand to prop up the robot mode whilst powered down, but putting that aside, it's a frank reminder that this is most definitely not a toy, nor a product the likes of which most Transformers fans will already have in their collections, with its primary function being interaction through robotics, as opposed to looking pretty on a shelf. Both the automatic pose and auto shutdown options can also be switched off in the app, should you prefer. Anyway, bringing Prime back to life, you can then equip him with his weapons. The first first of which is his signature ion blaster that fits snugly inside his hand and will come in very useful for some of the pre-programmed sequences we're about to witness. The blaster has its own LED light-up gimmick which can be activated by pumping the barrel. You then also have a clear plastic battle axe, which slots over the other hand and is a well-known reference to the G1 cartoon's pilot episode. In an unprecedented move, you'll then notice small flip-up communicator panels on both arms, featuring cartoon depictions of Megatron on his left side and Bumblebee on the right, both of which seem to be a bit of a callback to a similar gimmick on the first Masterpiece take on the character. As mentioned, the robot mode is where the main source of interactivity takes place, with a plethora of voice commands already at your disposal as suggested in the instructions.
Hey Optimus Prime,
Greetings.
who are you?
I am Optimus Prime. The Autobots need your help to defeat the Decepticons. Autobots, a mix-up maneuvers. Greetings from Cybertron. I am Optimus Prime. I am granting you permission to have the greatest birthday the universe has ever seen. Roll out. Fate rarely calls upon us at a moment of our choosing. Fire now.
You can then make combos of various pre-programmed actions by using the Customize command, allowing you to merge multiple prompts into one lengthier sequence.
Hey Optimus Prime,
Greetings.
customize.
Customize your arsenal.
Turn left.
Yeah.
Attack.
Yeah.
Turn right.
Yeah.
Protect.
Yeah.
Start actions.
Prepare for battle. We will always protect Cybertron and Earth.
All of this is absolutely great fun, and in my experience manages to entertain far longer than you might even imagine it would. Optimus has already provided endless enjoyment for me, my wife, my son, and even my stepdad as we've chuckled along investigating his various actions and all the many creative combos you can make. At the risk of saying it, it's the Transformers product I've found the easiest to share and enjoy with other family members more than any other in recent memory. However, if you're using the voice commands alone, then you're barely scratching the surface of what this thing can do, as there's a lot more concealed away inside the Robosen app yet again. Firstly, the app contains a lot more pre-programmed actions beyond what's in the instructions, including some of my personal favourites.
Till all are one. I need Energon.
There are then countless more that can be downloaded, including some which are incredibly lengthy and quite impressively beyond what you would witness the robot mode doing otherwise. It's a simple job to download each new set of skills for Optimus to complete, all in a manner which cannot help but remind you of Keanu Reeves in The Matrix.
I know Kung Fu. Show me.
However, you can also use the remote control in robot mode too. Firstly for allowing Optimus to walk around quite freely, but also with specific sequences for his weapons. By far and away though, the most interesting bit comes in the Create menu of the app, which allows you to manually build your own customized sequences for Optimus, including any movements you care to dream of, all partnered with an extensive library of pre-recorded Peter Cullen phrases, as well as other sounds and music. There are two ways to achieve this, the first being the Customize menu, where you create sequences by physically manipulating the toy. When you click Start, you'll notice that some of the joints on the figure go slightly limp, and the screen indicates in green that these are currently the ones that can be moved as you wish, although you can toggle each with ease depending on what you want to achieve. In this case, I can move the arms to whatever position I choose, and then when I'm ready, sync the app to store this movement in the first part of the sequence. Then it's time to create another movement before syncing that again and making it the second part. You carry on in this manner until you've ultimately recorded all of the steps you wish Optimus to undertake before saving your work. At this point, he will return back to his default stance, and you're ready to play your customized sequence whenever you're ready. Although what you're seeing on camera here is quite simple, trust me when I say it's a great thrill to watch this thing undertake a series of actions that you've personally designed. Admittedly, it does take a bit of practice to get it right, though fortunately it's an easy job to go back in and edit your save sequences and keep trying. The other method for creating your own routines is less physical and involves the block-based approach within the app itself. This menu looks more complicated at first, but it's essentially a case of building a series of controlled actions and loops, and specifying the different movements and precise joints at each stage. The whole thing relies on a drag and drop menu. Here you can add different joints to an action and then specify the range you want them to move, and even the speed at which you want this executed. By being methodical, you can build up some fairly complicated series of movements, whether in one start to finish sequence, or with some or all of them looped over in repetition, and all using multiple joints across the figure. What makes it even more amazing is that you then have the option to add music and sounds, as you'll find a surprisingly extensive library built into the app, including plenty of phrases from Peter Cullen.
Freedom is the right of all sentient beings.
But also an unprecedented amount of background scores from the 1980s Transformers cartoon, including some outright classics that I've never heard aloud outside of the actual animation. Amazing! You can unlock more sounds and music by completing various missions, which are essentially tutorials that help you to properly learn how to best use the customizing functions in the app by getting you to manipulate Optimus to match pre-designed sequences. It's just another fun way to enjoy this release and adds a bit of achievement to it all as well, which is good. Again, all of this absolutely takes a bit of practice, and I would advise some caution here in terms of being sure you know exactly what you're asking Optimus to do, lest you accidentally put him in harm's way once the sequence begins. I've already come slightly a cropper and caused a bit of damage to my copy by not being more mindful in how the joints were going to move. Holy user error, Batman. Still, it's no doubt one of the most creative and interactive aspects of this entire release, and I think is probably one of the most underhyped elements as well. I've seen one or two critiques of this thing saying that it potentially only has limited appeal for Transformers collectors, because ultimately once the novelty of the voice command function has worn off, what else is there to do with it? Well, I would argue these customization options are the major rebuttal to that, especially as they yet again make it very clear that this is not an action figure, the likes of which most of us are used to filling our homes with, and as such deserves to be considered in an entirely different category altogether. I think if you approach this release with the mindset of comparing it with your typical Transformers fare, perhaps even unconsciously so, then no doubt it might prove wanting on at least one or two fronts. After all, it's not something you can quickly manipulate and then whack on a shelf off in the way that so many of us do with the toys we already collect. But then we have plenty of options for that already. Instead, it's worth focusing on the many things Robosen Prime can do that the average lump of plastic simply can't. Chief among them being that I think it's a wonderful way to inspire young minds that may be interested in robotics someday. As I mentioned, my son is already well into this thing, as you might imagine, but I can also see how if he was just a bit older, the tools included here for building complex sequences and programming would be truly beneficial in more ways than just straightforward play. I'm sure some might scoff if I labelled Robosen Prime as being an educational experience, but I do think it has the makings of one, especially as it has all the elements needed to spark an intrigue for potential future robotics experts. I guess it's easy to look at it on face value and write it off as a hugely overpriced novelty item, the likes of which will ultimately end up collecting dust in your house. But I believe if you take the time to truly explore what's under the bonnet here and maximise this thing's potential, then honestly, it all starts to make a lot more sense. Yes, it's the kind of expense that most of us just wouldn't even begin to contemplate, but having been given the chance to actually experience it for this review, I can genuinely say I think it's actually good value for money once you have it in hand and you can see everything it does and what it's made of. If what you're after is a really gorgeous looking Optimus Prime toy for your display, or if you're someone who clearly prefers the more traditional method of transforming your robots by hand, then it may just not be for you. But as a product entirely separate from all of that, it's not hard to see how Robosen have crafted something with a very different sense of appeal here. And for those that want that, this thing is an absolute marvel. For my part, after all these years of collecting robots in disguise, it's thrilling to consider that I now have an actual robot in the ranks for the first time. And that, in my opinion, deserves a very wholehearted toot. Now, today's review is brought to you by TF Source, so I'll throw a link to their site in the video description below where you can check them out for all your Transformers and third-party needs. There are also links to both my Patreon and Redbubble stores, so be sure to take a look at those if you want to support me in exchange for some awesome perks and merch. Finally, I'd love it if you could drop me a like for today's video, please. And don't forget to let me know your thoughts on Robosen Prime. Do you like what you see, or not so sure? Otherwise, that's it from me, so thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day. TTFN.